Rebelde La Habana, la emisora de la revolución. Lo que necesitas para estar al día. Las noticias.
XCCPAE, Cultura 1060 AM.
1060 AM, WNOE is the exclusive New Orleans home for the Larry King Show.
This is BBC Radio 1, 990 AM, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg.
OOL-FM HD1, Phoenix.
Here in Cayman, there's so much pride in the roots, heritage, and history of our island.
Giving Jamaica a better music mix. This is Power 106.
Well, the radio station WNG 601. Broadcasting on a frequency of 162.425 megahertz from Rio Grande City.
We got him! We got him, baby!
That the police were looking and following some...
Yeah!
You survived the static.
You pushed through the noise floor.
Now it's time to hear what's on the other side.
Welcome to the ultimate celebration of the chase.
Broadcasting from North Shore Studios in Mandeville, Louisiana.
This is the From the Static podcast from DX Central.
We take you now to Studio A and your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
Greetings, my friends, and welcome to another edition of the DX Central From the Static podcast. I'm your host, Lloyd Van Horn, and we are here in North Shore Studios here in Mandeville, Louisiana, in Studio A, bringing you another edition, episode 33 this time, of the DX Central From the Static podcast. And we continue our series of diving into the data here of the current Sporadic E season with a little bit of a historical context sprinkled in there as much as we possibly can. Looking at the data and seeing what does it tell us. We have some new data to look at, not just for the month of July, which is what we're going to be looking back at, but we're adding some new data points we've never looked at before. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Very excited to bring those to you because this is something I've been wanting to do for quite a while. And just kind of diving in here and trying to figure out what's going on. So our format we usually do for this is we'll start off with just an overview, a high-level overview of the season to date. And then we're going to, from there, look back at the month of July from years past to try to get some sort of historical idea of what July looks like in our data set. And then we'll dive into the current year data of what does 2026 actually have going on right now. Right? What did July of this year look like? And then trying to put our thinking caps on and look ahead as much as we possibly can. There's only so much you can do. You can't really predict the future or forecast or prognosticate when it comes to Sporadic E. That's just not something we can do. But we can try to kind of figure, kind of based off of what the season is doing, what might we expect, or what possibly could we expect in the month of August in this case, for the last month of the actual defined season. And I'm going to use that defined in quotes here, in air quotes, because who knows? I mean, we have had years in the past where you saw Sporadic E past August, and with the kind of year we've had, who knows? Maybe we will this year too. I don't know. I really don't know. But we'll put our thinking caps on and kind of try to visualize what all of this might look like. So let's start with an overview here of the season so far. So it has been, and I think I've really kind of pushed this pretty well over the course of the season here so far in our first two episodes of this series. This has been a historic season. There's definitely no analog for this season in the data set in the modern era, kind of the SDR era, right? There's nothing since the mid-2010s that we can kind of point to say, oh, yeah, this is kind of like that season. Maybe 2021, and some folks do kind of point to 2021 as an analog, but this is so far beyond what we saw in 2021. That's as close as we can get, and it pales in comparison. And we'll explain why when we get to the data here for this year in the context. So you really have to kind of dive into your memory banks, and if you're more of an experienced DXer, I won't say old, because none of us want to be that. Experience, if you're one of the more experienced DXers, I've been doing this since 94, on the FM dial at least. And, there are some who have been DXing much, much longer than that. And you'll see it on social media. This reminds me of X season. Like I've seen 1980 thrown around quite a bit. That was a little bit too young to be DXing on that particular year. A lot of folks mentioning 1989. I hadn't really started DXing FM yet at that point, but I remember that being a pretty good year. Dad was pretty active at that point on FM DX and was really digging the season in 1989. For my own, 94 and 95 were really good years, but 2003, 2004, those are the two big ones. And I think I've seen quite a few people talk about those on social media. I think I mentioned 2003 on the last episode. This is very similar to me in that, where every day in 2003, I remember coming home from work at the radio station, and I would get home, and on the way home there was E activity happening, and I was working the midday shift, 10 to 3, and so I would come home at a little after 3 o'clock, and there was E's occurring, and I was living up in the mountains of North Carolina at the time, over around Sylva, North Carolina, Cullowhee. And I would go home and grab my boombox, and I would DX E's until late in the night, like way after dark. So this is reminding me a lot of that, especially the month of July. And there is something to be said for that. When we do our historical context, we're going to talk a bit about kind of when activity kind of peaks and how July kind of operates and how it's a little bit different than June. They're both heavy months, but it operates a little different than June historically. Not every year, but it tends to have a different pattern to how it operates in July than June. So we'll talk a bit about that. But yeah, it's definitely been like unlike anything that I have seen at the minimum in the modern era of DX and kind of the internet SDR era. Okay. You really have to go back into the early 2000s and those kind of peak years of 2003, 2004. I've seen some people mention 2011, 2009. Those kind of get floated around every once in a while. But 2003, 2004, 1980, 89, those are the years that I keep seeing people talk about on social media and elsewhere when they're trying to kind of put into context for themselves what this season has been like. And that's the whole purpose of this podcast. So what we're doing in these episodes this summer is trying to put some kind of context into perspective here for us in the current season. Especially because it is unlike anything we've seen in the SDR era. So yeah, that's the whole point of what we're trying to do. So right now, as we sit here on August 1st, we sit at 53,607 total logs submitted for 2026. And that's just May, June, July. Our previous best was last year, 2025, with 23,239. So we have quite a bit more than doubled our best season ever, and we still have August left to go through. And August is, sometimes it can be nothing, sometimes it can be no slouch. Recent years, it's been pretty good. So something to kind of keep in mind is that August may still surprise us with some more activity. Before last year, the biggest season that we ever had was 2022 with 17,685 logs submitted during that season. So you can get, again, just from that number alone, from 53,000 to 23,000 last year and 17,000 for the best year before that, right? That's first, second place. 53,000, 23,000, 17,000, right? You can get a sense of what I'm talking about when I say this season has been unlike anything we've ever seen before. Okay. When we look at the number of active days, it's kind of on par. That's not much different. We have 79 active days. We had every day in June, every day in July had activity. May had 18 days. Okay, and that's about average for May. So, and we don't hit the every single day of June and every single day of July lottery every year. In fact, it's only happened a couple of times in our data set, but it has happened before. That's not unprecedented to see some sort of activity every day. But the intensity and the level of the activity that we've seen, that's what's unprecedented. And we're going to dive into that and do some comparisons to the previous months here in this season, kind of show you the ramp up from May into July, because it's been impressive. Some things that really have stood out this season: the amount of high MUF activity has been off the charts. And I'm talking, we have had 8 days this season. 8. That's more than a week. 8 days this season with people logging eSkip on NOAA Weather Radio, 162 megahertz. That's a minimum MUF of 162 megahertz. You might maybe get 1 or 2 of those in a typical season. Maybe. I think we had a couple last year, like 2 or 3, maybe. But I don't know the last time we would have had a season where there was 8. You know what I mean? Like that's one of those things that's not really driven by SDRs, right? That's one of those metrics that you can't say, well, that's just because of SDRs. Now, it can be a little bit if you're using the waterfall to look, that kind of thing, or if you're using some of the online resources, things like that might be helping us to identify more when there's these high MUF events occurring. Definitely some of the collaboration that's happening between DXers on some of the different social media platforms, some of the different chat platforms, things like that are out there. That's helping people to say, hey, I'm seeing this. What are you seeing? So I think, that can be a factor in that for sure. But I mean, the conditions still have to be there, right? We all were sitting here talking on social media and the different platforms that were out there and available in 2022 and 2023 and 2024. So why didn't we see this kind of activity in those years? Because it just wasn't there, right? So 8 days of 162 megahertz or higher MUF. That's insane. That's very much insane. We're sitting at 678 logs per day. A 678 log per day average for the season. That's crazy. I've never seen that high. The highest we've ever had was July of 2021. We had 336, and was it June of last year, 2025? We had 339 logs per day in those 2 months. So the highest we'd ever seen before, ever, was about 336, 339, 340, somewhere in there, and that was in 1 month, right? One isolated month. We're at 678 logs per day average for the whole season. May was almost 200. June was over 700. And this year, July was at 900 logs per active day. 900. 900 logs per day. That's almost 1,000. That's almost an average of 1,000 logs a day. We've never gotten anywhere close to that. That's 3 times the amount of our best July ever. Our best July ever was almost 3 times that amount, or a third of that, rather. So that, I'm hoping this is putting into perspective the season so far. Okay, and just what we've seen. And there's more that we're going to dive into as we kind of get into the numbers here. But these are some of the high-level ones that I really wanted to kind of talk a bit about and kind of help frame the discussion we're about to have in the rest of the episode. Really quick, just high-level distance distribution. Double hop E is a little down. We're a little down compared to previous years. On average, your distance distribution right? So taking all the different distance ranges and trying to kind of categorize. I mean, we have a set definition that we use for that. And for us, possible double hop starts at 1,600 miles or more. It averages about 1.34% of all logs submitted. About 1.34% of all the logs that are submitted are that 1,600 or more mile range. A full 1% of that 1.34, the one in that number is Larry Horlick and Randy Zur out in Nevada. Randy's Nevada, Larry Horlick's out in Newfoundland. If we take those two out, the average is about 0.34. It's right around 0.3, 0.34. If we take everyone else's logs of double hop, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the overall logbook. Okay. But here's what's interesting. Short haul. This is what we kind of call that 300 to 700. Okay. There is this like hyper short E, which is under 300 miles. I don't really, that happens so infrequently. We don't track it right now. It's not even a 1/10 of a percentage point. Right. So we're not tracking that currently right now, like on our data set, but short haul we do. And it's about, and this is that 300 to 700 mile range. It's typically about 5.65% of all the logs that are submitted. Well, this year, possible double hop, that 1,600 mile plus, is about 0.84% of all the logs submitted. So we're down a little bit. It's a little bit less than what we usually see compared to years past. And that's across the board. Now we might have a chance to see that kind of bump up here in August, because August is a pretty strong double hop month. It's about 1.5% of all logs in August are double hop. 1.6% of all logs in July are usually double hop. 1.1% in June, and just under 1% in May, right? So you can see it kind of ramps up as you go. So just under 1% in May, little over 1.1%, 1.2% in June. You get to July, 1.6, 1.6 again roughly in August. So we might still see some more bump up here as we get through the month of August, and get some more double hop. Randy out in Nevada, Larry in Newfoundland, getting some more stuff in. This year, it was a bit lower though. 0.37% in May. So we were, the average is almost 1%. We're about almost a third of that in May this year. 0.52% in June. So right around 0.5%. And normally that's around 1.2, right? And then July was at 1.15. That was about that 1.2-ish. So we're a little behind on the double hop this year. The long stuff. But the short haul, that 300 to 700 range, typically is it at 5.65%, with a peak in July at about 6.29% of all logs in July are that kind of shorter stuff. This year, it's 6.75%, so a full percentage point higher and a little extra. 7.25% of that in June. So 7.25% of all logs in June were short haul, 300 to 700 miles. That 1 month is higher than any month we typically see on average for short haul. There's no month that ever usually kind of comes close to that. So that talks about some of the high MUF that we saw. And we were at 6.4% for July for short haul, which is interesting because we had more days of high MUF in July than we did in June, but we saw more short DX in June than we did in July. Interesting. Very interesting. So altogether, about 6.75% of short haul of the logs are short haul, 300, 700 miles. 0.84% are that possible double hop, 1,600 or more miles. 17% are that kind of 1,200 to 1,600 mile range. So that kind of a little bit longer DX, that typically is usually around 21%. So that's a little down as well. So we're not seeing the super long skip that we might see in other years, but we're seeing just a lot more of it. The DX that we're getting more of. So interesting stuff. That's our overall overview here for the season. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dive in to the historical data for the month of July and see what that tells us. What do we usually see in July's past, and what can we glean from that as we dive into the numbers from this year? So don't go anywhere, my friends. More of the DX Central From the Static podcast is heading your way right after this.
From the Static is made possible by listeners just like you. If you love tracking the bands and sharing the thrill of the chase, consider joining the crew in Studio C on Patreon. Your support is what keeps the dials spinning and the content coming. As a thank you, our patrons get exclusive perks, including early access to every single podcast episode, a full week of early access to all DX Central YouTube videos, exclusive patron-only live streams, and the first look at upcoming challenges and contests. Help us keep the static alive. Become a member today at patreon.com/DXCentral. That's patreon.com/DXCentral.
Ever wonder what the bands sound like down on the Gulf Coast? You don't have to wonder anymore. Head over to livedxing.com and spin the dials right from our North Shore studios. For AM, shortwave, and ham radio enthusiasts, we have a dedicated lineup of Kiwi SDRs ready to pull in weak signals. If you're an FM DXer, dive into our suite of 5 high-performance FM web servers, each paired with a top-tier antenna built specifically to catch legendary Gulf tropo openings, and hopefully some sporadic E. Plus, our VHF and tracking setups let you monitor local air traffic from MSY, pull in NOAA weather radio, and decode live APRS, ADSB, and marine AIS data right on the map. If you want to explore further, we've got links to global receiver directories to take your DXing worldwide. Experience the airwaves from our neck of the woods. For the DXer or radio enthusiast who wants to hear it all, visit livedxing.com today.
The summer heat is officially here, and that means the dials are catching fire. The 3rd annual DX Central Summer of DX Challenge is underway right now. This year, we've turned up the temperature. For the first time ever, we've added NOAA weather radio to the lineup. Get ready to hunt down those elusive, low-power weather radio stations via tropo, meteor scatter, or major sporadic E openings. We've completely overhauled the medium wave and FM interfaces with a brand new log entry process featuring full bulk import options to save you time. And the hunt goes deeper than ever. Alongside our classic grid square chase, we've added a brand new county chase and targeted bounty hunts to push your gear to the limit. Are you ready to claim your spot on the leaderboard? Head to summerofdx.com and log your catches today.
Summer of DX.
You're listening to the From the Static podcast from DX Central. Let's take you back to the North Shore studios and your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
We are getting close now to the end of the 2026 sporadic season, sporadic E season, and at least the end of the normally defined May through August season. We're now in the month of August, and we're talking some numbers here. We're looking back right now at the month of July. It's August 1st as I record this podcast. And so we're looking back at the month of July and just seeing kind of how it looks. And starting here, this next segment we're about to do now, how does it look compared to years past? So we're going to dive into that historical data. Now, for those who might be unfamiliar or new to the podcast and didn't catch our first 2 episodes in the series, I definitely invite you to go back and check out episodes 31 and 32, where we look back at the month of May and look back at the month of June. But this is all, this historical data we're about to talk about here is all available at our website, fmdxdata.com. This is part of our Sporadic E Data Analysis Project, or CDAP. And this is where we take logs that are submitted by DXers to fmlist.org, and we take that data and we run it through our analysis engines and our algorithms and everything else that we have. We have a little AI assistance in there as well, but we're running all the data through the numbers cruncher and then seeing what comes out and what the analysis is telling us. And then we kind of slice and dice that into a bunch of charts and tables and things like that, which you can find, again, up on our website, fmdxdata.com. For this particular part of the analysis, we are on the temporal trends tab. If you're looking at the data modules menu on our website, on the left-hand side, go to temporal trends, and then under the monthly log almanac section, click on the button for July, and that's what we're going to be looking at here as we kind of dive in. So if you want to follow along with us, go ahead and pull that up at fmdxdata.com, go to temporal trends, and then under monthly log almanac, click on July. So July is an interesting month. It can be an absolute barn burner, or it can be kind of a downward slide. We have seen both. There are years when July is the big month. There are years when June is the big month. And then there are years where they're both pretty freaking big. Okay? And those years are the special ones. And that's when we look at like 2022. Both of those, June and July in 2022 and 2023 were pretty magical. And last year too. 2025, June and July were both pretty magical, right? So we looking at our data here, let me start with some of the highlights here. Historically, you'll see an average of about 5,000 logs in any given year. That's the average total number of logs for the month of July in any given year is about 5,000. That peaked out at 10,086 logs in the 2021 season. That's until this year. That was our single highest log count we had ever seen in any month in the data set, was July of 2021, 10,086 logs. Even last year, where we set our new record for the highest season log count, we never got past that 10,000 log barrier. We got close in June and a little bit further in 8,892 logs in July of last year, but we just never did cross that line. Now, we did obviously this year. In June, we obliterated that line. You'll see in July, we obliterated the obliteration. But again, 5,000 is kind of the average. 10,000 was kind of the high water mark for the month of July. And then in between, we had some seasons like the second highest was last year with that 8,800, just under 8,900 logs in the month of July of 2025. The bottom, the low end, now... I tend to kind of put more weight on the more recent seasons from 2021 and on, just because before that, A, there were less SDR users in this data set, and B, there were less DXers using FM List in kind of that 2017 to 2019 range, a little bit of 2020 as well. We've really seen more people kind of gravitate to the platform since 21, which is great. It feeds our data, and it feeds a bunch of other things as well, so that's awesome. So I'm not going to put much credence into 2017 and 2018 where there were, 700 logs in the month of July in 2017, 700 in 2018. I don't think there was really, it wasn't like a terrible year that year. I don't know. I didn't DX those 2 years, but I would probably wager a guess that they weren't that bad in 2017 and 2018. 2019, it was up to 1,300. 2020 was about 1,376. I did DX 2020. That was a pretty rough year. It wasn't the worst, but it was a pretty rough year overall. We've also seen some other bad years. 2024 was pretty bad at 1,977 logs for the entire month. Now, that one I do put a lot of weight into because that was just 2 years ago. Lots of SDR users in that time frame. Lots of people in FM List. We just had a big peak the year before that in 2023. We saw another even bigger peak in 2025. So that 2024 year really kind of stands out as a subpar year with just under 2,000 logs for the entire month of July. We had more than that, right? Let me go back to my other data here. In the month of July of this year, we had 2,000 or more logs 5 times. So 5 days in this year's July, we had more logs than all of 2024 July's logs total, right? That gives you some context. Some other seasons was around, 2022, we saw 6,006. 2023 was around 6,300. So you can kind of see that it can be a really boisterous year on certain years. It can be a little more subdued on others. And one of the things that I typically see is that the number of active days, okay, last year we had 28. So there were 3 days that had no activity. Our top year was 2022 with 31 days. That was our best. 2021, we had 30. So we all talk about how great 2021 was, and it was. But there was 1 day in July 2021 where we didn't have any activity at all. And we also had a total of 13 days that were under 100 logs. That's a newer kind of data point that I'm tracking now, is the number of days under 100 logs, because that's the one where it's just kind of like, So that could be a 0. That would be an inactive day. But as far as active days go, under 100 logs, how many did you have, right? So out of 30 active days in 2021, 17 of them had over 100, 13 had less than 100, right? That's how we were kind of figuring that out. There were 7 days that year that were over 500 logs. 7 days. And then we had 3 days that were over 1,000. There was another day that was a little under 1,000 at 956. But there were 3 days over 1,000 logs in 2021 in the month of July. And that was kind of like, that was the high water mark for all other months, right? Nobody had ever really seen that in the SDR era, that many days that close together. I mean, we're talking, this is from the 8th of July to the 14th, 1,306 logs on one day, 538, 401, 956, 83, 1784, 1525, and then it kind of fell off after that a little bit. So in the SDR era, that 2021 season, we had not had anything like that before. To have that many logs, those kind of big enough of an event days, back to back to back kind of, right? In that short amount of time. We had another multi-day year in 2023 with over 1,000 logs. So we had 2 in 2023, one on the 9th, and then one more on the 20th. So that was there. And then last year we had multiple days over 1,000. We had the 21st of July, 1,462, but the big one was the 4th. That's the one everyone remembers last year, 4,890 logs on July 4th. That was the first time we had ever exceeded 3,000 logs in a single day in our data set. In the SDR era, we had never seen that before. The closest that we got was June of 2023, where we saw 2,686 logs. That was the closest we'd ever been before July 4th of last year. We had never crossed, that was the first time we crossed 2,000, and then we had never crossed 3,000 until last year, 4,890. Well, if you remember our episode last month, we did that 3 times in the month of June, back to back to back. Right, 3 days in a row over 2,000. One of those over 6,000. So July typically can have some really nice days in there, some really big activity days. But one of the things that kind of separates a good July from a bad July, and this goes back to what we talked about last month as well, is kind of those mid-level openings, those about 500 to 1,000 log days. The more of those you have, the happier people seem to be with the season, the better quality of the season there is, because there's more consistent activity and more people are kind of getting in there, having some action, filling up their hard drives with recordings and so forth. I kind of equate it to you like to have 3 big meals a day, and then you'll have some snacks in between to kind of keep you satisfied and kind of satiated between meals, right? Well, that's kind of what we're talking about here. You like to have 3 big openings a month, right? 2 to 3 big openings a month, over 1,000 logs. And then you like to have some of those snacks, those 500 to 1,000 log days in between that kind of keep you going. And then you'll have a couple here and there that are under 500, but maybe over 100. And then you'll have some that are really slow days under 100. But the fewer of those you have, and the more of those 500 plus ones you have, the happier folks tend to be. Well, that's what I'm seeing here in the July data as well. Our best year, our very best year for those 500 log days, 500 or more log days, was 2021. We had 7. Okay. So when I say, that's what people really look for, I mean, that's when people talk about 2021, they remember the big days, but they also remember those 7 snack days. Right? Or I guess in this case, 5 or 4 of those were snack days. 3 of those were the big days. Because that was total of 7 over 500 logs. 3 of those over 1,000. The other 4 were kind of like those kind of mid-level ones, right? So we had 4 days of 500 to 1,000 logs, 3 over 1,000, nothing over 2,000 that year, and we had 17 days over 100 logs. So there were 17 days in there where you had that mixture of like 100, 103, 105 logs, or maybe you had somewhere in the 400, 300, 200 range. Enough of those to kind of keep people kind of going, right? That's what you're kind of looking for. Another kind of overall trend here about the month of July. July is when we see 2 things happen that are kind of consistent in the data. It's not always 100%, but it's pretty consistent. One of those is you tend to start seeing your openings that last longer into the evening ramp up in July. So you get those openings that last well beyond dark, 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock. Those openings tend to be more frequent in July than they do in other months. Another thing that happens in the month of July historically is you tend to start seeing more geographical footprint for the openings. So I've talked about this on previous episodes where in the month of May, there are obviously exceptions to this, but the predominant paths seem to be more southern focused in the month of May. So we're seeing more stuff down to the Caribbean, Mexico, from down here in the south. People up north have some openings, but they don't have the level of openings they're going to be getting later. Then in June, that shifts north, and you start seeing more activity up north. Okay? Upper Midwest, New England, Midwest, all that area, right? You start seeing more activity there. In July, now that whole thing expands. You start seeing some of that southern stuff come back in again. You start seeing that northern stuff. The West usually starts cooking in July a little bit more. It becomes more expansive. The footprint of ionization tends to expand a bit in the month of July compared to the other months. So that's another trend that we typically see in our data set is more just a bigger footprint and then more openings that are going to last later into the evening. Okay. Those are the kind of the things that we typically see in the month of July. So, and also when we do, one other thing that we typically see in July, when we do see openings in July, that also tends to be where we have some of our best high MUF days is in July. And so the best that I can kind of come up with for this is that in a year where July is kind of your predominant month, this will be more pronounced. If it's not the predominant month, you'll probably still see it, but not as pronounced. The clouds are denser. Right, the ionization layer, ionization patch, whatever you want to call it, cloud, whatever term you want to use for it. There's people who kind of debate that back and forth. That ionization is more dense, and the more dense that it is, the higher MUF it can refract back down to Earth. So you can get those higher and higher frequencies, shorter and shorter wavelengths refracted back down, the more dense that ionization area is. And that seems to peak a bit in July. historically. Again, it's not 100%, it's not 1-to-1, but it tends to happen that way. So one other thing we need to look at for the month of July here is the flow of the month. And when does activity typically happen? Is it front heavy? Is it back, the back end? Where does the activity typically happen? Well, it is typically a front heavy month. The first 2 weeks especially, that's where the vast majority of activity tends to take place, is the first 2 weeks. After the first 2 weeks, things typically start slowing down a little bit. On some years, you might see, especially some of the better years, you might see a little bit of a peak around the 20th, 21st. We had that last year where we had 1,400 logs on the 21st last year. We had a little peak on the 20th in 2023 with 1,100 logs on that day. But other than that, after the 21st, so the 22nd through the end of the month, in none of our years in our data set were there any that had 1,000 logs or more. And I'm looking here to double check. I only see 1, 2 days that were over, and that was spread out over 2 different years. 2 days over 500 logs after the 22nd. After the 22nd, it just falls off a cliff. In fact, if I look at from the 22nd of July through the end of the month, like last year, there were 2 days that had no logs. There were 5 days that had 10 or less logs. And that was last year. We had 8,000 logs last year in July. It was a pretty good month. And even that month last year, it kind of fell off pretty sharply after the 21st. 2024, I'm not even going to bother with that one because it never got off the ground. But it really got bad after the 21st, right? We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days of 1 log or less. 6 of those had nothing after the 21st. Most of when you look at our temporal trends heat map, our monthly almanac heat map on fmdxdata.com, you'll see, if you look at the month of July, most of the days that have zeros next to them for that year are after the 21st. So anything after the 21st that you get is extra. That's the way I kind of look at August. I'm like, anything that comes in August is just extra. It's bonus. It's a little something extra. We call it down here in Southeast Louisiana, we call it lagniappe. So it's just a little bit of something extra that you like when you find that extra $20 bill in your jacket pocket from last winter, right? That's kind of what late July and all of August is kind of like for me. The first 2, maybe 3 weeks, that's really the peak of what you're kind of looking for. After that, you're hoping to get something, but you don't expect much, right? So now that we know all of that about July, let's take a look at this year's July and see how does it stack up. How does it stack up with active days, number of days over 500 or 100? What was the flow like? What did we see coming in? We'll do that when we take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll do that dive into current year right here on the DX Central from the Static Podcast.
From the Static is made possible by listeners just like you. If you love tracking the bands and sharing the thrill of the chase, consider joining the crew in Studio C on Patreon. Your support is what keeps the dials spinning and the content coming. As a thank you, our patrons get exclusive perks, including early access to every single podcast episode, a full week of early access to all DX Central YouTube videos, exclusive patron-only live streams, and the first look at upcoming challenges and contests. Help us keep the static alive. Become a member today at patreon.com/DXCentral. That's patreon.com/DXCentral.
The summer heat is officially here, and that means the dials are catching fire. The 3rd annual DX Central Summer of DX Challenge is underway right now. This year, we've turned up the temperature. For the first time ever, we've added NOAA weather radio to the lineup. Get ready to hunt down those elusive low-power weather radio stations via Tropo, Meteoscatter, or major Sporadic E openings. We've completely overhauled the medium wave and FM interfaces with a brand new log entry process featuring full bulk import options to save you time. And the hunt goes deeper than ever. Alongside our classic grid square chase, we've added a brand new county chase and targeted bounty hunts to push your gear to the limit. Are you ready to claim your spot on the leaderboard? Head to summerofdx.com and log your catches today.
Summer of DX.
Hey DXers, do you need a break from the same old static? Well, then you need to tune in to DX Radio, where we're spinning the best custom DX-themed music on the web.
What are you doing?
What's up?
Please, step away from the microphone.
I mean, I'm just cutting the DX Radio promo.
You hired me to be the station voice. So why are you doing the station voice?
Well, I mean, to be fair, DX Radio is a DX Central venture. It's my project. Plus, do I need to remind you, I actually do have some radio experience. I was on air, I did sports, I was a news director.
Ah, yes. Who can forget your tenure in the massive market of the mountains of North Carolina? We're all still deeply moved by the legacy of Uncle Lloyd's Bluegrass Hoedown Jamboree. Not to mention those years doing college radio.
Okay, first of all, it wasn't so much a hoedown as it was a jamboree. And second, I know my way around a promo read.
Lloyd, you pay me to read the promos. Let me do the job you hired me to do. I don't walk into your office and interfere with your spreadsheets or fuddle about with the antenna feed lines. If you feel the need to manage someone, maybe go stop Gary from trying to use the vibration of the studio monitors to mix the ingredients in his morning bowl of oatmeal.
I'm just trying to tell them about the website. Wait, did he actually do that?
But you are rushing it. It lacks mystery. How do you expect to properly prepare them for the After Dark playlist if you sound like you're selling them aluminum siding or trying to convince them to attend rock and glow bowling at the Bowlerama?
You don't need to prepare them for anything, Peter. It's just the nighttime rotation.
It is unbridled mayhem, Lloyd. It is the audio equivalent of a fever dream. You cannot just tell them about the After Dark rotation. You have to make them feel the danger.
You just want mic time, don't you?
I am simply trying to justify my paycheck before the interns burn this building to the ground.
All right, fine. The floor is yours. Just make sure you actually read and hit the URL this time. This is probably dxradio.com.
Don't get me started on that proverbial mouthful of a URL. Did they make you pay by the letter for that one? DX Radio, custom DX themed music for the discerning listener during the day. An absolute, unapologetic Hunter S. Thompson novel after the sun goes down. Experience the mayhem. Tune in now at thisisprobablydxradio.com. From the Static podcast from DX Central and your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
Looking back at the month of July here on the DX Central from the Static podcast for our current Sporadic E season. Now, we've set the ground level here for you, the context, the foundation of July's past in our data set at fmdxdata.com. So now let's take a look at current year in the month of July and see what it looks like. All of this data will be added in later on after the season is concluded to our data set at fmdxdata.com. It's not there yet. We'll be adding in 2026 later on. I'm just giving everyone a chance to do more of their IQ recording reviews because logs are still being submitted. So as I say that, all the data I'm about to go over with you here for the current year is all preliminary. It should be considered preliminary data. Now, that just means the numbers are probably going to go up, if anything. But these are all preliminary numbers. The final counts will be a little bit different when we get this put into the data set later on once it seems like everyone's got their stuff in. Okay? All right. So July of 2026, we did our recording last time. I want to say it was the 8th. Wasn't that when we recorded? We just had like a big day that day. Yeah, it was July 8th. We were doing our podcast recording for episode 32 on the 8th of July. And that day we had just a really nice big opening that day. We had several days of like pretty decent size openings, like 800, 700, 900 logs, somewhere in there for like 3 or 4 days straight. And then we had this like bigger opening, close to 2,000 logs in the day. And I was like, yeah, this is good stuff. So July is looking good. But I didn't know what was ahead. There's no way I could have. I had no idea what was still yet to come. So July was a big one. Whether you're looking at the SDR era or not, this month of July here in 2026, I would put this month up against any season you can name. Now, will it come out on top? Most of them, yeah. There may be one or two from like the, 70s or 60s that I'm just, ignorant on, right? I'll fully admit that, where there was more MUF, higher MUF, or more days, or longer events. There's probably something like that in the record. But I'm telling you right now, if there was a season where there was a better July than this one, I don't know how you could, especially not now in the SDR era, where everybody's recording all their stuff on their hard drives. You would need a data center just to hold all your recordings. It started off a little slow. July did. 52 logs on the first, 9 on the second, 31 on the third. So it started off a little slow. We had seen kind of a quiet end to May. We saw a little bit of a quiet end to June as well. Not as quiet as what we did in May, but June ended kind of quiet as well. And June started off as a firebrand, if I'm going to be honest. June came out of the gates hot, ready to roll. July, it was a little bit more of a slow burn, right? So we ended up, just as a reminder for you, June 27th, 1,000 logs, 1,076, June 27th. 28th, we had 515. 29th, we had 301. The 30th, we had 254. So kind of a peak, and then we had a slow, gradual ramp down. Well, then it bottomed out here. 52 logs on the first, 9 logs on the second, and then we saw the rebound. 31 logs on the third. So I remember when I saw that, I was like, okay, we had kind of a big peak here. We just came out of June, which had this like massive amount of activity in it. We just had a peak on the 27th. We had a slow ramp down. It seems like it's bottomed out here on July 2nd, and then I saw it bump back up again on the 3rd. I thought we were heading for like a 2 or 3, 400 log day on the 4th. We ended up at, right now at least, 868. The 5th, we followed up with 849. We followed that up on the 6th with 719. That is then followed by the 7th with 861. I want you to think about that. That's 4 days in a row over 700 logs, 3 of them over 800. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in our data set. Typically, on a typical year, or any other year that wasn't 2026, you don't see that, right? You might see 1 or 2 days like that, and then it's going to ramp down again, right? That's going to be kind of your peak, and it's going to fall back down again. But we had 4 days over 700, 3 of them over 800 logs, and it wasn't done because July 8th hit, and right now we're at 1,972 logs on the 8th. And it still wasn't done because the 9th we had 518, the 10th we had 558. July 4th through the 10th, we had a total of 6,345 logs submitted from the 4th through the 10th. 7 days. 1 week. 1 week, 6,345 logs. I knew right then this was going to be a special month. Because we had just had that in June. From the 6th, from the 2nd of June through the 11th, we had 16,000 logs, right? So now here we are, the 4th through the 10th, we're at 6,300 logs. So I knew this was about to be a special month. I still didn't know if it was going to be bigger than June, but I knew we were heading for something special. But we were running out of time. That was the problem. And that's what made me a little more cautious about how I talked about this month on social media and the different platforms out there. I didn't know if we had enough time. Because, remember, after the second week, things start slowing down a little bit, and then after the 21st, they fall off a cliff. Well, we are now at the 10th. So whatever happened the 11th, 12th, and 13th was going to be very, very, very important. And the 14th even. The 11th through the 14th, those 4 days were going to be very, very important. Well, the 11th started, we had 112 logs. The 12th, we had 137, so decent. The 13th, we had 26. We're going in the wrong direction. The 14th, we had 258. Okay, that's a little better. So in those 4 days where we needed to really kind of see us, get some pretty big, we had 533 total logs in those 4 days. So now I'm a little nervous about my prediction that I had in my head of, this is going to be a special month, because we went from 6,300 logs over that week to now we have 4 days and 533 logs. I'm thinking we're running out of time here. We are now at the 2-week mark. That's not to say that this third week here won't be potentially something special, but we have to make up a lot of distance, and I just don't know if there's enough juice in the month of July left to be able to pull it off. That's exactly what I was thinking. July 15th, 487 logs. Okay, that's better. That's better. That's what I expect to see. The 16th, 234. Oh, man. Now we're ramping back down again. We're on the downward swing. I'm thinking, was that 487? Is that the new peak level we're going to see for the rest of the month? Is that like our new high spot? I don't know. We'll see. Oh, and I just realized I didn't mention July 7th was a day where we had an MUF over 162 megahertz. Okay. So we had 2 of those days in June, and we've had our first one on the 7th of July here. We had one of 162 megahertz or higher, right? July 17th. 2,139 logs. 64 DXers. That's the highest DXer count that we'd had so far in the month of July. And it was second place behind our peak, June 10th, 73 DXers and 6,200 logs. Okay? So 64 DXers. We also had an MUF at 162.5. July 18th. 2,423 logs. 71 DXers. MUF peaking at 162.55. July 19th. 3,637 logs. We're going up. Every one of these days has been busier than the one before it. 3,637 logs. MUF 162.55 at minimum. 66 DXers. July 20th. 3,526 logs. That's a little bit under the 19th. 72 DXers. MUF of 162.475. So we just had 4 days in a row where MUF reached into, or the top of, in several cases, the NOAA weather radio band at minimum. It could have kept going higher, but that's the highest I can see in our data set is NOAA. And they were all 3 of them over 2,000 logs per day. All 4 of them, rather, over 2,000 logs per day. 2 of them were over 3,000 logs. Actually, 2 of them were over 3,500 logs. So in that 4-day span, we snagged 11,725 logs. You thought that 3-day span in June was good with the 8th, 9th, and 10th? And it was. I mean, 6,000 logs or more on the 10th. That's pretty good. 2139, 2423, 3637, 3526, and those numbers are still preliminary. And again, all of this is happening at the end of the 3rd week of July when we should be on the ramp down. We should now start seeing things tailing off a little bit. But we're seeing things actually accelerate. We're seeing a ramp up of activity, not a ramp down of activity. Now we're at the 21st, 277 logs. 22nd, 24 logs. And here's where Lloyd says, I think we've seen what we're going to see for the season. I think that big burst right there was as much as we're probably going to get. I'm not saying we're not going to have some activity, because we will have activity between now and the end of the month. We'll also have some activity in August. We will definitely have some, and we might even see a day or two, 5, 8, 900, maybe something over 1,000 in August. But I think we're going to start seeing things. It's got to start ramping down now. It's the 21st. Things always fall off a cliff at this point, especially after what we just had of 4 days of that high level of activity. The ionosphere is going to need a period to kind of go, whew, let me catch my breath. And here we are, the 22nd. We're bottoming at the 24 logs. 23rd, 380. We're not on a build back up again, are we? And here's something that I noticed. In all of those days where we had that back to back high activity, and some of these other days, like that 380, I think, if I remember right, most of that came at night. So this is where, again, I kind of point back to that thing we said in the last segment where we're talking about how July is where you start seeing those like later openings. Well, I started seeing that this season when you would have these openings that lasted into 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and you'd look up on the PSK map for 6 meters and it was still active well into the evening, well after dark. Those typically correlated to the next day being kind of a big day. Now, when you had these days like 277 on the 21st or 24 on the 22nd, you didn't see that as much. You didn't see that at all, probably. Well, the 23rd, I remember seeing a lot of activity on 6 meters that night, and I think I remember right, we had quite a bit of activity, I think it was out west, on FM that night. And I thought to myself, I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be a big day. I just have a feeling that we're about to see something significant here on the 24th of July. 4,208 logs, July 24th. 63 DXers. And once again, an MUF reaching 162.55. This is one I woke up that morning with a path up to New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Quebec, my longest DX of the year on the 24th. 1,400 mile DX. A lot of 1,200 plus mile DX that morning. And then it kept going all day. Now, I had to bow out of the DX that day. I had a lot of day job commitments that I had to take care of. My hard drive space was getting kind of tight, and a lot of the stuff that came in later on that afternoon were paths that I have hours and hours and hours of IQ recordings I haven't even touched yet. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to let this one kind of ride. But it kept going. The E-skipped here was nonstop from like 9, 10 o'clock till the evening. I mean, I could have had 12, 13 hours worth of recordings on the 24th. It just kept going. But I had to stop. Now, I did come back in that night, and I did do some recordings because the band was just so full. And I think it was at the time it was pointing up towards Minnesota, South Dakota, Wisconsin for me. The band was just so full. I was like, well, I need to let me just do like a 30, 45 minute recording, and I'll just grab whatever I grab. Whatever's there is there. I'll go through that methodically, log it all, because it was one of those where like the path just wasn't changing very much. And I was like, that should get me most of what I would have gotten here on this path. Now, some of the stuff during the day I had to miss out on. Michigan, Ontario, Pennsylvania. That's pretty common. But the stuff up into Minnesota, Wisconsin, also very, very common. Very, very common. It wasn't moving very much. The paths were very consistent. They were kind of locked in. So I said, let me just grab 30 minutes of it, and that should represent overwhelmingly the vast majority of what I probably am getting here. But I was more focused on No Other Radio, and I had 5 new stations that night on eSkip between Minnesota and Wisconsin on No Other Radio on the 24th. Unbelievable day. Unbelievable day. It's right up there with June 10th for me. As far as intensity, duration, July 24th and June 10th were the highlights of the year. And again, the 24th, that's after the 21st. Activity should be ramping down. And we had never had anything over 1,000 logs ever before in our data set after July 21st. And here we go, 24th, 4,200 logs and counting, one of the biggest openings of the year. In fact, that is our second biggest opening of the year behind June 10th. And we just had 4 days of 2,000 logs or more, the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th. So at this point, there wasn't anybody I was seeing there was nobody complaining on social media about the quality of this season. Even the people who weren't getting DX were like, I gotta admit, it's a pretty big season. And now that's when people started really talking after those 4 days, and especially then now we had to add the 24th onto it. Now people are like, okay, this is a historic season. I'm comparing it to 1980. I'm comparing it to 2004, 2003. There were still some people who were like, nothing will ever beat 2021. There were still some people who were kind of holding off on that, and that's fine. But the 24th, that was a big one. That one and June 10th. Those 2 days made this season very, very, very special. 10,000 logs between those 2 days. More than 10,000. More than 10,000 logs between those 2 days. That's pretty special. July 25th, 334 logs. July 26th, 796. We're back up on the upswing again. And sure enough, July 27th, 1,300 logs. And at this point, I'm like, I don't know what to expect anymore. We should be ramping down. We should be. But it doesn't seem like it wants to. I don't know what to expect here. Because we should be seeing nowhere near this much activity at this point in July. Well, it did calm down a little bit. July 28th, 354 logs. July 29th, 578. July 30th, 228. And then yesterday, I'm recording this thing on the 1st, July 31st, 5 logs. So there you go. So it's starting to cool off a little bit. Now, does that mean it's done? Well, I'm sitting here looking right now. It's August 1st. And let me see, there have been a total of 33 logs submitted today on August 1st, all of them from Larry Horlick, all into Europe, right? Nothing here on the contiguous U.S. on the mainland happening today. So there will be some activity here for North America as of August 1st, but everyone's getting kind of a bit of a breather. And I'm not seeing a lot of people complain about that. Looking around social media, some of the different platforms out there, I don't see anybody complaining like, well, I guess the season's done. I don't see anybody complaining. Because July just would not stop. Now, I haven't verified this. Someone told me that they read an article, I think it was in the ARRL's QST, that was doing kind of a outlook for a 6 meter sporadic E for the rest of the season, for the rest of July and August, and that we were on the upswing. Now, I want to say that was before we had our big 4 days in a row and then our big July 24th. So that may have been the upswing they were talking about. I don't know. But they were saying that the indicators looked pretty good, that we would be getting some possibility of some good 6 meter activity at least in through August. So I don't know what that means for us, but that's where we were. So let's do some of the counts here. 31 active days in July. Only 6 of those had less than 100 logs. That's the lowest we've ever had. We've never had that low of a number of days with 100 logs or less. We had 25 days of 100 logs or more. We've never had more than that. We had 15 days of 500 or more logs. We've never had that many before either. 15 days out of the 25 were 500 or more logs. That means there were 10 days in there that were between 100 and 500 logs, right? We had 7 days of over 1,000 logs. We've never had that before until this year. June, we had 7 days of 1,000 or more. This year, we have had 7 days in July of 1,000 or more. So other than the last 2 months, we've never seen that before. Okay. So of the 15 days that were over 500, 7 of those were over 1,000. That means 8 of those days were between 500 and 1,000. Okay. That's a lot. That's those snacks I was talking about earlier. Here's the new category. I had to create a new category this year that I've never ever tracked before because it wasn't ever needed. Days with 2,000 or more logs. Never looked at this before. We had 5 of them in July. We had 3 last month in June. We had 5 of them in July, 4 of them back to back to back to back. That gives us 8 for the season. We've never had more than 1 in a season. And we only had that twice. 2 different years had 1. This year we've had 8. That's never happened before. Days where the MUF rose above 162 megahertz. We've had 8 of those this year. Makes sense? 8 over 2,000. 8 days of MUF of 162 or higher. You see the correlation there? Now, it's not a 1-to-1 because there were 3 days over 2,000 in June, only 2 days of MUF over 162. There were 5 days over 2,000 logs in July, 6 days with MUF over 162. So it's not a 1-to-1 correlation, but it just happens to average out that way. Okay? Number of logs per day. I talked about this earlier. 193 in May, 739 in June, 900 logs per day average in July, for a grand total of 678 on the season. 900 logs per day. Let's talk about the distance distribution here. We talked a bit about this earlier. 1.15% double hop. So we were at 0.37 double hop in May, 0.52 in June, and then we jumped to 1.15. So there's always kind of we talked about this last segment, there's always kind of a rise in July of double hop activity. We start seeing more double hop, longer skip. We also start seeing more stuff out west, which means Randy out there is getting more stuff, and he's the biggest driver of double hop, him and Larry Horlick up in Newfoundland. The two of them get more double hop than anybody else, and Randy especially starts seeing more activity in July. Well, that happened here too. How well a season does at producing double hop is another one of those things you can use to kind of say how good was it. Well, July was pretty good. It's still below some of the other seasons because the average is about 1.34% is the overall average for double hop. But July was pretty good. We crammed a lot into a short amount of time. We're still at 0.84% for the year, but August is here, and August tends to be a little bit high on double hop percentages as well on the overall ratio. Regionally, let me go back. I think I talked about this in the last segment, but short hop or short haul, 300 to 700 mile. 6.44%. So that was down in July compared to June. So there was more short distance skip in June than there was in July. Not a huge difference, less than 1 percentage point, but still enough to be significant. The regional breakdown, let's talk about that. Midwest, most of this is Bill up in Nebraska. 15,000 logs for the for the Midwest, rather. Bill's 5,200 of that. So there's still 10,000 logs for the rest of the Midwest. Upper Midwest, just under 10,000 in second place. Mid-Atlantic, 7,400 logs. The Southeast, which is normally right behind the Midwest. When you look at this historically, the Midwest is number 1, Southeast is number 2. Sometimes Southeast might take them, depending on the month. Southeast is in 4th place on the geographic breakdown right now. That's crazy. That's crazy. 7,368 logs. 21 unique DXers in the Southeast, 21 in the Mid-Atlantic, 19 Upper Midwest, 25 in the Midwest. Now, who was getting the high MUF? Midwest, Upper Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, and Canada all had MUF of 162.55. And Northeast had a 162.475. And so the West, the Southwest, Mexico, and the Northwest, none of those did get in on the NOAA high MUF stuff. Those were clouds all out towards the east. Okay. Logs per DXer. We're at 372 logs per DXer on average for the season. That's insanity. That's absolute insanity. We've never been that high. We've never seen a 372 log per DXer number. That's just crazy. The highest we'd ever been for a season was 208 logs per DXer in 2021. Last year was 195. So 208 logs per DXer for the season was our previous high. We are now at 372 for the season in 2026. And when you look at it regionally, like some regions like Midwest, 628. Upper Midwest, 526. 356 for the Mid-Atlantic, 351 for the Southeast. It's crazy. It's crazy. Some of the distances here are just insanity. Northeast has the highest distance for the season, other than Larry Horlick in Newfoundland at 2,700 miles. 2,485 miles for the Northeast. The shortest, Southwest 1,680. Southeast 1,688. Yeah. So we get a lot of logs here in the south, but the MUF or the distance is not great. I mean, I've never had my furthest log I have is 1,423 miles. That's my all-time longest ever, and that was here in Mandeville. I've never gotten higher than 1,400 logs or miles. Also, let's talk about the hourly kind of breakdown here, and then we're going to get into a new metric we've never looked at before. The by hour, you definitely can see when you look at the season, you can see the double hop. Or the double dip. And so the peak hours are 10, 11, and 12 o'clock in the morning at 49.80, 48.67, and 44.19 as far as log counts, with a second peak from 6, 7, and 8 o'clock in the evening, 42.81, 49.24, 44.38. So 10 a.m. is the highest log count, followed closely by 7 p.m., and then 11 a.m., and then 8 p.m. 11 a.m. and then 8 p.m. and then I guess that'd be next one would be 12 o'clock, noon, and then 6 o'clock. Yeah. Those are the peak hours. Now, here's the interesting thing about July. I talked about how it tends to be a little bit more spread out and it tends to stay longer into the evening. Well, we see that in the data here. Because we look at just July, we have the peak happening between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. And then we still have high log counts just under the peak from 2 p.m. to 7. And then we see another peak at 8 o'clock. And then we have a little bit back into kind of like the normal kind of 1,700 or so logs at 9 o'clock. And then we see 900 logs at 10 o'clock. That's the highest 10 o'clock spin all year. 400 logs at 11 o'clock. That's the highest it's been all year. 180 at midnight. That's the highest it's been all year. 57 at 1 a.m. The highest it's been all year. Right? So you see that kind of push into the evening in July. It happened this year. And that's traditionally what you typically see. And it absolutely verified in the data this year. Now, I look at like the hourly breakdown for June. You had this kind of lull between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock where it dipped down to 869 logs at 3 and then 913 logs at 4. Local, and these are times local to the DXer, right? So it doesn't matter what time zone you're in. Well, the lull in July after 9 a.m., the biggest lull that we had was 9 a.m., but it didn't dip back down below 1,600 logs. 1,678 was our lull at 2 p.m., but that's still a really high number. 1,648 at 6 o'clock, maybe that's a little bit of a lull. And then it didn't dip down again below 1,700 until we got to 10 o'clock at night at 989. So it was nonstop. We'll call it 1,600 logs or more per hour from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. for the month of July. Between 1,600 and 2,900, 1,600 and 2,900 logs per hour between 10 a.m. and 9 p.m. That's crazy. Those are openings that didn't stop. We had one of those in June. We had the June 10th, but we had multiple days like that in July where it just wouldn't stop. Crazy. Let's take a look at another metric we've never looked at before. And it's one that I've wanted to do for quite a bit of time. But I could never kind of get the algorithm to do what I wanted it to do. And finally, with some AI assistance, we made it happen. So Pat Dyer used to count number of minutes for his e-skip seasons. And that's one of the barometers that he used to gauge the quality of the activity of a season, was how many minutes of sporadic E did it produce for him year over year over year. Well, that's fine if you're looking at your logs because you can count your logs. You kind of know how to do that. You know where the openings were. But when you're looking on a macro level, it becomes a much harder thing to do. So one of the things that happens is I can't just say, well, let's start with the earliest log and the latest log and count the number of minutes, because that wasn't always consecutive. You might have had a little opening here, another little opening in the middle part of the day, a little opening in the early evening, another opening in the later part of the evening. You could have 4 or 5 openings over the course of a day, and not one of them were connected to each other, right? So you need some way of kind of being able to segregate those. So I did some testing. I did some talking with some other DXers, and I think what I landed on here is probably the best kind of course of action. I had my AI assistant do some A/B testing on multiple different settings, but I think what we're landing on here is that we have anytime you have a DXer who has a gap of 45 minutes or more from one log to the next, that 45-minute gap is the break point. That's a reset point. So let's say I have logs I'm going through. They're all, we're one after another. Maybe a 10-minute gap between some logs here and there, that kind of thing. But then we get to, let's say, 11 o'clock. And I have my last log at like 11:15. And then I have my next log at 12:30. Well, guess what? That's a new opening. We're starting the clock again. I'm not counting between 11:15 or 11 o'clock or whatever I said, and then the 12 thing. I'm not counting between those. That's downtime, right? While the cloud was moving, maybe there wasn't any activity. If you have a 45-minute gap of nothing in your logbook, then you weren't getting anything. Now, when that started back up again, that could be the same cloud, but it's in a new location now. So it's a new opening, essentially. So that's the logic that we used here. We used a 1 minute minimum. So if you submitted one log, that's a 1 minute minimum. And 45 minutes in between logs is the break point to reset the counter. So with that in mind, I had the algorithm not only chew on the 2026 numbers, but all of the years in our data set from 2017 through 2026. And I said, give me the breakdown of the total number of minutes per DXer. Right? I didn't want to look at the total number of minutes total because that's a little weighted because of number of DXers and things like that. I said, give me the number of minutes per DXer. That should get me as close as I can possibly get to a Pat Dyer number. Right? That number of minutes logged per DXer of sporadic E activity is as close as I can probably get to a Pat Dyer type number to do seasonal comparisons. Now, there's still going to be some factors that might cause certain seasons to be higher than other, especially in this more modern era of SDRs. If you're doing these recordings, you can get more of the recording, more of the opening logs. You have a more broad amount of minutes than you would if you were doing it live, right? So maybe you catch stuff that extended further than you had during the live event. Whatever. And obviously, another thing that matters here is that the opening actually could have lasted longer than what we're seeing here, but I'm not going to sit here and log a station every minute that it's being heard. Now, that would be a fun exercise to do, but I'm not going to log a station every single minute that it's being heard. So you might have the end of the opening was all stuff you've already logged. And so it actually lasted longer than what you're seeing in the logging data. So that's another thing to kind of consider is these openings might actually be longer, but when we count up the number of minutes based off of the submitted logs, we do that evenly across all of the years. Here's what we get. Before this year, before 2026, our highest minute count per DXer was 2021 at 805 minutes per DXer. In second place was 2022 at 677.9, so 678 minutes per DXer. In third place was 2025 at 582.2. So when I've talked about 2025 and how, yes, we had some really big events and we had all these openings that gave us really, really big events, but then you had all these gaps in between where you weren't getting a whole lot. So people were kind of on the season. This tells that story. This absolutely tells that story. And it explains why 2021 still is talked about as like this amazing year when you're looking at 805 minutes per DXer for 2021 as our high water mark. 2023 was fourth place, 554. 2020 was in fifth place at 446. Then you have 2018 at 420. You have 2017 at 416. 2019 at 282. And last place, 2024. Every single metric that season sucked. 2024 at 244 minutes per DXer. That's terrible. That's a fourth of the best year. Well, best year until now. So 2021, 805 minutes was the best year until 2026. 2026 has now set a new high water mark for us at 1,144 minutes per DXer. $1,144 minutes per DXer. Guys, that's 19 hours. The average DXer, Joe DXer, in Anywhere USA, 19 hours. 19 hours of DX, of Sporadic E this season. There are some people that are way above that, by the way. Way above that. When you look at the top 10 DXers, number one spot was at 13,000 minutes. Number two is at 6,500. Third place was 5,900 minutes. I'm not going to mention the names here. Third place was 5,900 minutes. I wasn't in the top 10. I'll tell you that. I was not even in the top 10 for number of minutes. But yeah, I mean, the high end, the people of the top 10, everyone in the top 10 was over 4,500 minutes of DX. The person who had 13,000, I'm not going to mention their names. They were at 12,797 minutes. That's 213 hours of Sporadic E activity for that DXer. That is insanity. Now, that person has a really good setup where they are. Really, really good setup. But that's insane. By the way, when we look at this by geographical region, the upper Midwest takes the cake at 1,850 minutes per DXer in the upper Midwest. That's crazy, right? And when I say upper Midwest, just so I can be very, very clear about how that's defined, upper Midwest is North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Okay? That's the upper Midwest for our purposes here. North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. 1,850 minutes per DXer for that. Crazy. Almost 1,900 minutes per DXer in the upper Midwest. Here in the Southeast, we were at 1,295 was our average. Now, I was around, I think 3,000 something for mine. So I was a little bit above average on that, but I was lucky. It's very lucky. And I have an ELAD that has a full band, so I can do full band recordings. So that benefits me. That helps me in a way that a lot of DXers aren't doing. That's one thing that I have that's kind of going for me, is that I can do that. So when we look at the numbers, looking at this per month, just because this is interesting, the number of minutes per month per DXer, May was at 149. June was at 550. As good as June was, 550. July was at 741 minutes per DXer. 741 minutes per DXer for the month of July. That means, on average, the typical DXer spent 12 full hours involved in DX in July. The average DXer. That's crazy. That's crazy. And like I said, when we look at the numbers on a comparison to years past, well, 805 was our previous high water mark. And right now we're 1,144 minutes per DXer. And we still have August. All of the 805 included August. we have all of August yet to go. Who knows? And that brings me to my next segment. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, let's put our thinking caps on and think ahead to the month of August and see if we can kind of make any sense of what to expect here. So don't go anywhere, my friends. More of the DX Central from the Static Podcast heading your way right after this.
From the Static is made possible by listeners just like you. If you love tracking the bands and sharing the thrill of the chase, consider joining the crew in Studio C on Patreon. Your support is what keeps the dial spinning and the content coming. As a thank you, our patrons get exclusive perks, including early access to every single podcast episode, a full week of early access to all DX Central YouTube videos, exclusive patron-only live streams, and the first look at upcoming challenges and contests. Help us keep the Static alive. Become a member today at patreon.com/DX Central. That's patreon.com/DX Central.
Ever wonder what the bands sound like down on the Gulf Coast? You don't have to wonder anymore. Head over to livedxing.com and spin the dials right from our North Shore studios. For AM, shortwave and ham radio enthusiasts, we have a dedicated lineup of Kiwi SDRs ready to pull in weak signals. If you're an FM DXer, dive into our suite of 5 high-performance FM web servers, each paired with a top-tier antenna built specifically to catch legendary Gulf Tropo openings, and hopefully some sporadic E. Plus, our VHF and tracking setups let you monitor local air traffic from MSY, pull in NOAA weather radio, and decode live APRS, ADSB, and marine AIS data right on the map. If you want to explore further, we've got links to global receiver directories to take your DXing worldwide. Experience the airwaves from our neck of the woods. For the DXer or radio enthusiast who wants to hear it all, visit livedxing.com today.
The summer heat is officially here, and that means the dials are catching fire. The 3rd annual DX Central Summer of DX Challenge is underway right now. This year, we've turned up the temperature. For the first time ever, we've added NOAA weather radio to the lineup. Get ready to hunt down those elusive, low-power weather radio stations via Tropo, Meteoscatter, or major sporadic E-openings. We've completely overhauled the medium wave and FM interfaces with a brand new log entry process featuring full bulk import options to save you time. And the hunt goes deeper than ever. Alongside our classic grid square chase, we've added a brand new county chase and targeted bounty hunts to push your gear to the limit. Are you ready to claim your spot on the leaderboard? Head to summerofdx.com and log your catches today.
Summer of DX
47.
The on-air light is back on in Studio A. That means it's time for our final segment of the From the Static podcast from DX Central with your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
And it's our final segment here on the DX Central from the Static podcast. We've talked about the sporadic E season we've had so far and the historic nature of it. Just how good July just was. It just was so good. And we thought June was amazing. And it was. It was really, really strong. It was a really, really good month. Compared to everything else on our data set, June was remarkable. But July was just that much better. I mean, I don't know if I said the totals out loud here, but the total from July, 27,911 total logs in July. And again, these are preliminary numbers. We're still counting. 27,911 logs. June had 22,166 logs, which was more than double our best month ever in June. June of 2026 was more than double our best month ever. July just outpaced it by over 5,000 logs, which would be a really good month for most years, or at least a decent month. Even May even May, 3,467 logs for a total so far of 53,544, which more than doubles our best season ever, which was last year at 23,000. So I hope that all these numbers kind of put into perspective what we're looking at here when we talk about 2026 and the Sporadic E season. So we have August left to go. What can we expect? Well, obviously, there's no such thing as a Sporadic E forecast where I can predict and say we can expect to see this many logs on the FM band or whatever. But what I can do is I can, let's talk about historically what August looks like. And then B, I can talk to you about how this season has performed in relation to what that might mean for August. Okay? What to look for as we go into August. So first, historically, August as a whole, not a big month, right? Before last year, our biggest August ever was 2022, where we had 1,400 logs for the month. We had one day that year at 348 logs in June, or August rather, of 2022. 348 logs. Everything else was less than that, with the vast majority of the month being inactive. There were 20 active days out of 31. So 11 days had no activity whatsoever. There were only 5 days out of those 20 that had over 100 logs. So 15 days out of the 20 in 2022 had less than 100 logs to them. So it's a light month. You might get some months where you have some pretty good activity, but the amount of activity you get on those days is pretty light, relatively. 2021 was pretty good at 963 total logs, 9 active days. So much, even compared to other years, just not much going on there in August of 2021. You had one day over 100 logs in that month. The rest of it, and that was 810 logs. The rest of the month was, nothing, hardly at all. Right? So 2021, you had a little bit of a burst right there. And that one day at 810 was on August 4th. So we had a little bit of a burst right there. It was like 4 logs, 93, 6, and then 810 on the 4th. And then after that, it just disappeared. I think the high point was 36 logs one day. But other than that, it was just nothing. Now, last year was a little different. And this is what's going to kind of bring me to 2026. So last year was a little different than all the other years. Our high watermark had been 1,400 total logs. Our high watermark for a day was 810 until last year. Last year we had 2,917 logs in the month of August. Okay. From that 2,900 logs, we did have one day, August 13th, where we had 1,400 logs. We had another day at 567 logs. We had another day where we had 493 logs, right? So we had multiple days of pretty good activity. Now, we only had 17 total active days, so a little bit lower compared to 2022 as far as number of active days, but the log counts were much higher. There were 4 days of over 100 logs per day. That's just behind 2022. But the big one was we had 3 days over 500. That was significant. I'm sorry, 2 days over 500. I read that wrong. 2 days over 500. So that was significant. And one of those was over 1,000, which we never had in August before. We had never crossed 1,000 logs. So let me tell you why that gives me optimism for 2026. Okay? Every single month in 2026 has outpaced every other year for that month in our data set. This year, May was our biggest May ever, and it wasn't particularly close. Okay? The highest May we'd ever had before this year was right in 2023 at 2,400 logs. Now, 1,600 of those 24 happened in one day on the 31st. Before that year, though, the highest we'd ever had was in 2021 at 1,700. Last year, we had 1,500. Okay. So it was not the best May last year, but it was pretty good. June this year obviously is our best June ever. Eclipsing last year, which was our biggest at 9,859 logs. That was our biggest June ever was last year, just under 10,000. Well, this year we had 22, right? So June obviously was way beyond. And our May this year, we had 3,500 logs, which was way beyond anything we had ever had before, even the 2,400 that we had in 2023. And then July was our biggest, not only July ever, but biggest month ever. Our biggest July before was 10,000 logs in 2021. And this year we've had 27,000 and counting. So every month has been the biggest version of that month in our data set. And in most cases, it's been by a pretty significant amount. Well, if that's the case, our biggest August was last year. And we were sitting at 2,900 logs for the month of August. Last year, 2,900. Most cases, we've doubled our best ever. Okay? 2023 notwithstanding, May did double up our previous best May, other than 2023. It doubled up those. It didn't double up 2023, but again, that was the year we had the 1,600 on May 31st. So it still counts, but I kind of look at that as like a June opening. Because it behaved like a June opening, right? So it kind of snuck in there right there at the last minute. It just kind of snuck, I'm May, but I'm not really May, right? But it still counts. So we didn't double up May, but we were really, really close. We blew June out of the water, more than doubled. We blew July out of the water, more than doubled. So now we come to August. If we were to double our best August ever, we'd be just shy of 6,000 logs in August. Well, if you're getting 6,000 logs in August, that's not something you probably are going to get with like one big 4,000 log day in August. There's going to be a spread out of that. Now, how spread out is it? I don't know. How many of those little smaller days of 5 to 1,000 logs are we going to get those snacks? I don't know. I have a feeling it's going to be pretty spread out though. Okay? I don't know how deep into the month it's going to go, but I have a feeling that we are heading for something in the neighborhood of about between 3,000 and 6,000 logs for the month of August. If all of the other trends that we're seeing this year hold firm. If we have our biggest August ever, it'll be a minimum of about 3,000 logs. That would be pretty significant. It could be as much as 6,000 or more, which would be tremendous. Right? Another thing that we're seeing this year is that every single month, we're seeing, now I don't think this particular trend is going to continue, we're seeing more active days of 500 or more logs each month. I don't think we're going to see more than that. We're not going to see more in August than we did in July. July was going to be our peak, okay? But will we beat May, where we had 3 days of 500 or more? Probably. Especially considering, and here's the other thing to keep in mind, last year, August was bigger than May. And 2026 has basically taken what we had last year and said, everything that you did last year, I'm going to do bigger this year. And so everything that we did last year has been amplified in 2026. So if August was bigger than May, maybe that happens again this year. If it does, well, May this year had 3,500 logs. So if August is bigger than May was, which is what happened last year, and, every month is bigger than all of the years before, 3,500 would definitely meet that criteria too. So maybe we snuggle in somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000 logs. I think we'd all be happy with that. For August? And anything more than that, anything more than if we do nothing else but just beat our biggest August ever, which was last year. If we hit 3,000, somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 logs, I think there's not one person who would be upset with that. Even if they aren't involved, I think they'd be like, yeah, that's pretty cool. we'd be around just under 60,000 logs for the year. And anything more than that is going to really it's going to put a lot of people's hard drives at risk, mine included. So, what can we expect in August? I don't know. There's no way of knowing, obviously. But I do think we're heading for, if I had to guess, with an educated guess, I do think we're heading for something on the order of about 3,000 logs for the month. Whether that happens all at once, or if it's front-loaded in the month, or if it's spread out, I don't know. I don't think we're going to see anything like we saw in July as far as the amount of activity spread out each day. We're seeing like these 6, 7, 8, 900 logs per day kind of thing, and then a couple 500s, and then some 2,000s. I don't think we're going to see any of those. I don't know if we'll see any more MUF into the NOAA Weather Radio Band. I don't know. Probably not. If I had to guess, probably not, but maybe. Probably not, though. I would anticipate probably, as far as the minute count goes, since we're looking at minutes, I would probably say something, it won't be 500 minutes. That was June. I don't think we'll get to that number. We're definitely not going to get to 741 like we had in July. I would say probably something on the neighborhood of about between 150 to 200 minutes per DXer average. Now, some of you will see more, some of you will see less. But I think the average might kind of bear out somewhere in the 150 to 200 range. If I had to take an educated stab at it. I could be way off. I could be way off here. But I think when it's all said and done, August is going to give us somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150 to 200 minutes of activity per DXer on average. And somewhere on the neighborhood of about 3,000 to 3,500 logs for the month total. That's weighing what we had in May. That's weighing that, this is hopefully this August will be the biggest August we've ever had. If that doesn't happen, if we fall short of that accomplishment, that milestone, it's going to be kind of a disappointing end to the season for me. I'm sure not everyone will kind of feel that. I think a lot of people would still be like, "Oh, it was a pretty good season," even if we didn't hit that mark. It was still pretty good. But I would be disappointed because I want to have that statement where I can say every single month was the best we'd ever had. If I can't say that, I feel like, come on. I feel like we need to have that to finish out the season with a nice, consistent, symmetrical finish. So that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping this is our biggest August we ever had. I'm hoping that I'm hoping that August is bigger than May was. Again, that'd be really nice, like we did last year. And I'd like to see it where maybe it's a little more spread out later into the month, where we have some bigger days like that, spread out through the month with some decent sized snack days in between. Maybe, I don't know. I still think you're going to see most of your activity up front the first week. If I had to guess. Most of it will be here this first week of August. By the time you're hearing this podcast, we're going to probably know. But I still think we'll probably see most of the activity here the first week or so of August. And then maybe some sporadic stuff happening after that, probably. But that's what I hope. I hope we have the biggest August ever. I'd like to see that count somewhere in the 3,500 range or more for logs, 150 to 200 minutes or more per DXer for the amount of activity. I think we could all live with that. That way it's not so much that it's like, oh my gosh, this is daunting. This season is exhausting. This is a wearing me out season. I don't think we want that, but I do think we'd like to have a nice little finish, especially if it can be some paths. Ionosphere, I'm asking nicely. Some paths that we didn't really see during the season. So for me, that would be out west. For me, that would be down into Mexico. For me, that would be maybe down into Central America a little bit. Yeah. But especially the out west. If it's a lot of Michigan and Pennsylvania New York, Ontario for me, and Michigan and Wisconsin for me. Okay, I'll do it, but if it's some Arizona, some New Mexico for me, if we can get our friends out west some really good openings, that would make me very happy because they deserve it. They deserve to have a nice, strong finish. So that's my look back at the month of July and my look forward here at the month of August. Who knows how much that will come to pass? I may be entirely way off, but who knows? We'll see. Hopefully you've found this information to be interesting, educational, insightful. We'll do it again next month when we look back at the month of August and see how it actually turned out, and then do our kind of season recap, the whole season as a whole. And just basically, I mean, there's not going to be much suspense to how, the quality of the season. I think we'll just be saying just how historic was it. We already know it's one of the highest, but all right. From all of us here at DX Central, my friends, we want to thank you for tuning in here to the From the Static podcast. Don't forget, we are coming back up soon this fall on the return of DX Central Live. I haven't set the date yet for our official date of return for season 7, but I'm working on the details and getting prep work kind of started now, as we're now into August. I like to have it somewhere in September or October, somewhere in there, so I'm kind of percolating a couple of dates in there. But we'll be returning for season 7 here pretty soon, which means here on the podcast, you'll be able to listen to our audio-only versions of DX Central Live here on the podcast each week. And so make sure, whatever platform you're on right now, that you subscribe, like, follow, share, whatever it is you have to do to click the little button to do what you got to do on the podcast. That would be a huge help for us, and to make sure that you don't miss any episodes of this podcast, especially as we get into the DX Central Live Season 7. So take care, my friends. Best of DX. Good luck. Hope this August treats you well. 73. We'll see you on the other side right here on the DX Central From the Static podcast.
You have been listening to From the Static, a podcast production of DX Central.
DX Central is your premier destination devoted to all things AM and FM DX.
Expand your DXing experience by subscribing to our YouTube channel at the handle @DX Central for comprehensive how-to videos, DX air checks, and much more.
And join the community every Friday night from September through May for our weekly live streams. You can find us at dxcentrallive.com.
Ready to test your skills? Head over to dxchallenges.com to participate in our regular contests and challenges built specifically for AM and FM DXers around the world.
Or, if you would like to experience the bands from the Gulf Coast, visit livedxing.com. We provide an assortment of online receivers that allow you to spin the dials exactly as if you are sitting right here in Mandeville at North Shore Studios.
Need a soundtrack for your next DXing session? Check out DX Radio at thisisprobablydxradio.com, featuring custom DX-themed music aimed squarely at the DXing community.
If your brand or business is interested in reaching a dedicated community of radio enthusiasts, sponsorship opportunities are available. Please reach out to us via email at sponsors@dxcentral.net.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DX Central.
This podcast is a production of DX Central and is copyright 2026 by Lloyd Van Horn. All rights reserved. Any unauthorized rebroadcast, reproduction, or use of this audio without express written consent is strictly prohibited.
Thank you for listening. Keep the dial spinning 73 and best of DX.